Hello and welcome to Learn Spanish a lo Boricua. Today's episode is a class on the conversation from the previous episode, La comida típica de Puerto Rico. And I realized that the way or the order you should go about working with this podcast depends on your level. So if you're super beginner and you're not able to follow a lot of the conversation because it's fast and you're still learning the vocab, then it would actually be better to kind of start with this class because you're going to have a lot of the vocab presented to you. You'll have a lot of the context presented to you. So it'd be better to do this and then listen to the episode before. You have a lot more context and you'll feel less frustrated as you work through the episode. If you're intermediate, advanced, you're following most of the podcast, then it's good to listen to it, do the class afterwards, listen again, maybe afterwards, so those things start to click and you have just a more reinforcement of the vocab and the concepts that you're learning. All right. As always, I recommend that you view today's episode on YouTube because when you're looking at words that hearing words that you've never seen before, you really need to have a visual piece so that your brain can latch onto them more quickly. I know I talked about this in the last episode. It just doesn't stick in your brain. You can't reproduce the word, especially if it's a longer word, after you've only heard it once. There's a piece of being able to see it written that helps solidify that word in your brain. So the link to view today's episode is right there in the podcast description. Head over to YouTube. Please give this a like. Please subscribe to my channel. If you like what I'm doing here, if you like the amount of time I'm spending on this podcast, which is all for free, then please subscribe to the YouTube channel, subscribe to the podcast. That helps it get more followers, and eventually I can monetize once I get to 1,000 subscribers, okay? All right, as always, on the agenda today, we'll be going over vocab, pronunciation. I don't know if I'm going to continue to include that into the episode into the episode moving forward, because it's the same patterns of pronunciation that we've already talked about. The dropping the letter S, dropping the letter D, how R sometimes becomes L when it's before a consonant, like verde or importante, porque. And the arrastrar la R, which happens in all parts of Puerto Rico outside of the El Área Metro, or San Juan area. I don't think Alfredo really arrastró la R. That's the sound of the H for the R, for the rolled R. So just yesterday, he was talking about how he needed to lavar la ropa. Ropa is what that would sound like. Anytime it should be a rolled R, which would be a R at the beginning of the word, right? Rápido, ropa. Ridículo, then that R needs to be rolled. So I don't think he did any of that in this episode, but the patterns of pronunciation stay the same once you start listening to a particular accent. So you'll continue to hear those examples over and over again. I've got just 2 examples to go over today, grammar-wise. Let's get into it. Today, I wanted to break our vocab into verbs that came up in today's in the podcast from the previous podcast. And that verbs are related to cooking. And then we'll also look at some other phrases that were used. I've got some fun phrases for you to add into your vocab this week. Let's get to it. First and foremost, cocinar. Most important, most basic one to cook is cocinar, if we have that already. And then, of course, kitchen is la cocina, la cocina. Hervir is the verb for to boil. We might have used it in verb form, but I know that we definitely would have heard it, hervidos. He was talking about guanimo and how you would hervir la masa, or la masa es hervida. The dough is boiled, which we'll see dough in just a second. And that's the difference of preparation between guanimo versus domplines. Okay, I wanted to touch on something that came up with a student who's beginner-ish. She's just in her first couple months of Spanish. And it's an important thing to note that in English, we use ED endings, both for adjectives and for the past tense. Stay with me. If you're new in grammar, don't start swirling. I've got some real concrete examples that'll help you think about this. Okay, so remember that adjectives describe nouns. They describe people, places, or things. That's what a noun is. So think about saying a boiled egg. That is just an adjective. How was the egg prepared? It's a boiled egg. You're using it as an adjective to describe the egg. But we would also use boiled as the right word for past tense the verb, right? I boiled the eggs, or they are boiled eggs. In that sentence, they are boiled eggs. What's the verb? Are. They are boiled eggs, okay? In the other example, I boiled eggs. The verb is boil. I'm the one doing the action of boiling in the past tense, okay? So beware of that. That's something that you have to, if you're a beginner, you have to sort of separate those things in your mind. Am I describing something, or am I saying that I did an action in the past tense, right? Okay, hopefully that makes sense. If I was going to use boil as a verb in the past tense, I boiled the eggs, I would have to take hervir and put it into the past tense conjugation, right? Herví. Herví would be the past tense of hervir for yo. Freír is to fry, freír, okay? And then using it as an adjective to describe something as fried, we call it frito. That's not the verb in past tense, that's an adjective. So comida frita is fried food. I'm describing the food as fried, comida frita. If I want to say I fried, then I have to put this verb in past tense, okay? Freí. Let's keep going. Mofongo relleno. You will see that as a stuffed mofongo. That means that it's going to have meat in it and a sauce, salsa as well. And so rellenar is the verb for to stuff. You'll also see this in Puerto Rico. They have pechuga rellena, so stuffed chicken breast, pechuga rellena. You have aguacate relleno, stuffed avocado that will usually, again, come with some type of meat, and, some vegetables, etc., salsa. So relleno is something you'll see a lot. It's stuff. This is also the word you would use for stuffing on Thanksgiving. Relleno and relleno. All right. We talked about too when I got into my confession about how I'm not the greatest cook and I had to look up how to prepare beef. You would have heard me use the verb descongelar, which means to thaw. It's the opposite of congelar, which means to freeze. Okay, congelar, descongelar. So in other places, congelador, I think it is, or congeladora, whatever, is the freezer. In Puerto Rico, know that it's called el freezer. El freezer. So they're not going to use that word as the noun for the thing, the freezer, but they do use the verb absolutely for to freeze, congelando, freezing, to congelar, to freeze an object. Let's look at some fun vocab and phrases. Right off the bat, I introduced this even in the first minute of the podcast, the word gastronomia, which is used very commonly in Spanish. You know, gastronomy is also a word in English that we never use. So think of it instead as cuisine. It's talking about that country's cuisine. La gastronomia, pay attention to the I accented. When you have ia endings, the I has to be accented if you're going to lift your voice in that sound. Gastronomia, right? La panaderia is a bakery. Zapateria is a shoe store. So anytime you have that accented I, it lifts on that sound, ia. But if it's not, words like memoria, the I is not accented and your emphasis would have to fall right before. Memoria, pandemia, right? That's memory, that's pandemic. Historia are another ones. It's not historia, it's not memoria, it's not pandemia. Pandemia sounds like Mia's bread, pandemia, okay? And you would have to, so pay attention to that. IA endings, you're only going to emphasize it if your I is accented. Otherwise, it needs to fall on the syllable beforehand. Memoria, historia, gastronomia. There I pronounce there I emphasize the I. As I already mentioned earlier, la masa. Masa means dough. No le meto en la cocina. I wanted to talk about this phrase that's used so much in Puerto Rico. No le meto, o sí le meto, or saying that alguien le mete. Él le mete en la cocina. Él le mete en la música. Lo que sea. I want to use an example here. Let me share my sound. I'm going to switch over to my browser real quick. And we're going to take a look at our friend, Señor Santos. Arcángel aquí. Let's listen.
Soy chiquito, ¿verdad? Pues cabrón, imagínate que yo soy chiquito, flaco, cabezón.
Yo soy chiquito, flaco, cabezón, cabezón. I'm small, I'm skinny, and I got a big head.
Tengo que meterle.
Tengo que meterle. Don't look at this incorrect CC here. Tengo que meterle. I have to be good at it, is what he's saying. We'll come back to the PowerPoint. Let's go a little bit further in this.
Claro.
De la única manera que por la cual yo tengo una posición dentro de este género, porque yo no soy el más bonito, no tengo el cuerpo más cabrón.
No soy el más bonito, right? I'm not the prettiest. No tengo el cuerpo más cabrón. I don't have the best, sexiest body.
Me pongo lo que quiera.
I put on whatever. Me pongo lo que quiera. As far as talking about a style.
No es diga que soy el que más viste que si lo otro.
I'm not the one that's like all dressed to the nines, whatever.
Cabrón, ¿por qué tú te crees que es que yo tengo una posición dentro de este género?
Why do you think it is that I have a position within this genre?
Porque yo le meto.
Porque yo le meto. Le meto means you're good at something, or because it is slangy, I would say a good way to translate it as well is to say, I kill it. I kill it. Yo le meto. I kill it. In rap, he's amazing. He kills it. That's why he has a position and respect in this género, because it's not because él es el más lindín, like the más bonito, like Raúl Alejandro, for example, right? So in this example, let's come back to how I use it. No le meto de la cocina. I'm not great in the kitchen. I'm not killing it. If I say le meto en la cocina, which is what I usually will say about my dad, mi papá le mete en la cocina. My dad is a badass in the kitchen. My dad kills it in the kitchen. My dad is great in the kitchen. I'm saying I'm not killing it in the kitchen. Really important phrase to have. You will hear this all the time. And that was in reference to la carne molida, right? The ground beef, carne molida. Notice that it has to be feminine because la carne is feminine. Fantastic phrase. I'm so glad that this came up when I was talking to Alfredo about why we can't eat mofongo all the time. Cae pesado. Cae pesado literally means it falls heavy, and it's used to describe food that makes you feel stuffed, or, excuse me, even that maybe doesn't sit right with you. Okay. So I can't eat certain fruits and vegetables that are fermentable, whatever. I get a lot of reflux. I love onion and garlic, but I end up burping up onion and garlic all day. So this is something Alfredo will say to me. He's like, and I was like, it's not that I'm picky. He said, sí, es que la cebolla te cae pesado. La cebolla te cae pesado, right? The onion doesn't sit right with me. It falls heavy. I don't digest it well. Or you could use it for food, again, that makes you feel really stuffed. El mofongo cae pesado. Y por eso no lo podemos comer todos los días, right? The mofongo is really heavy, dense. It makes you feel stuffed. And that's why you can't have it. You can't eat it all the time, every day. Another one that came up that I'm so glad that it did. I was trying to find the word for consumption there. You might have heard this in the podcast. I was asking Alfredo, and he was stuck too, because I was trying to use consumpción, which is not a word. My English brain was failing me there. Consumo. I said el consumo per cápita. The per capita consumption of beef or chicken in Puerto Rico. And Alfredo was like, wow, eso es una palabra de domingo. Una palabra de domingo means a formal word. It's literally a Sunday word. Why? Because you think of it something that would be used in church. Thy shall not. Sunday words, right? It's formal. It's something that's fancy. I used per capita consumption. That's una palabra de domingo. This is good to know when you're learning words from different places, from books, from things you read, and you might be trying to, you'll try them out when speaking, and somebody might say, oh, wow, you'll react like that. Ah, no, es una buena palabra, es una palabra de domingo. It's a good word, just it's fancy, it's elegant. It might sound very, depending on the context you use it, it might sound a little bit too formal also. So it's just part of the process. You gotta learn those things by going through them. Okay, we have arrived to the tastiest part of the podcast. So if you have Puerto Rican heritage, if you are with a Puerto Rican, if your partner's Puerto Rican, then some of these things will be quite familiar to you. If you've been to the island, you will have already known about this type of vocab. But I thought it was important to review and food is such a central part of culture, not only revealing sort of the ingredients that are used and etc., but just all of the traditions around food. So let's look at some of the things that came up. I tried to pull everything that we mentioned in the podcast and find some pictures and go over it today. Obviously, we talked about el mofongo, which you'll see here in this big, beautiful picture on the left, which can be relleno, right? Relleno is what? Stuffed. It can be relleno de camarones. We got shrimp. It could be churrasco is steak. I mentioned mero, which is grouper. What else have I seen? I think you can get pollo and etc. I think I a lot of times go for some sort of seafood, or the churrasco is really good. The type of salsa that they have as well will vary. You can have salsa criolla, which is a red salsa. Comida criolla is referring to Puerto Rican food, by the way. So salsa criolla is like a Puerto Rican sauce, red sauce. You'll have a crema or salsa de seta or crema de seta would be two different types of sauces that use mushrooms. In Puerto Rico, commonly the word seta is used for mushrooms. That's S-E-T-A, seta. There's like 5 different words for mushrooms in Spanish, so good to know that. Pero sí, aquí tenemos el mofongo a base de plátano, but not right now because will not be plantains again until September of 2023. Gracias a Huracán Fiona, which washed out the harvest. Here in the top right, we have pasteles, which are cooked in la hoja de plátano. Right here, la masa can be a masa de guineo and masa de yuca, or I think the other one might be a masa de guineo. There's 2 different types of dough that are used as the base. I'm pretty damn sure about yuca. Don't quote me on the guineo. There's some other masa that can be used there for pasteles. Here at the bottom, we've got arroz con gandules. These are gandules, are these little peas that you see. Very delicious. Mouth is watering. All right, over here, we're going to talk about the 2 things Alfredo mentioned, that la masa de los domplines y de los guanimos es lo mismo. Es lo mismo. It's the same exact type of dough. It's just one is frito y el otro es hervido. One is fried, one is boiled. Okay, using it there as adjectives because the verb is what? Is fried, is boiled. All right, we've got domplines. It's very popular in Ponce as well. There's a number of domplines spots. And I think the most classic way to serve it is with habichuela guisadas, or stewed beans. But there's also, you can make, ask for pedir sandwiches from these domplines. They can be stuffed and made into a sandwich. Very tasty. This is Alfredo's favorite food, guanimo con bacalao guisado. Okay, so we've got guanimo here. Oh my, that does not. One second, that does not say. It says babacalo. Let's try that again. Bacalao. I don't know if that was an autocorrect mistake or what. Guanimo con bacalao guisado. Okay, so right here in the word guisado, bacalao that's just how it is written, bacalao. But guisado, we can see the feature of Puerto Rican pronunciation where they drop the D. That would normally be guisado. Guisado, but it won't sound like that here. It'll sound like guisado. Con bacalao guisado. Not my favorite. I don't love the taste of cod. Bacalao is cod, and I've always felt that way about it. But this is Alfredo's just favorite meal. Chicharrón here, typically made with cerdo, with pork, but chicharrones de pollo also exist, fried little chicken pieces. Okay. Domplines, guanimo con bacalao guisado, y chicharrón. Let's talk about yonicle. When Alfredo was talking in the podcast about yonicle, it was the first time I had heard that other name for guanimo, which is yonicle. And so I looked for it to see the spelling. And when I tried it with a Y, yonicle, and then I saw there was an article that was like yonicle or yonicle con J, coming from perhaps originally Johnny cakes. That might have been what this is originally pulled from, the word Johnny cake. It was there in the title of the article. I didn't do extensive research. I'm going to be completely honest about that, but it did make me laugh. That maybe it comes from Johnny Cake, Johnny Clay. Animos. Más fritura, which is fried food. Right here we've got this big beautiful picture are our alcapurrias. Fried and stuffed with meat, olives, obviously aceituna, olives, etc. Alcapurria. There is a place that sells giant alcapurrias. It's like a foot-long sub. That's pretty famous here on the island. My personal favorite, arroz con habichuelas guisadas. Our stewed beans here, habichuelas guisadas. Que rico. And finally, you'll see here, it's very commonly served with aguacate, a little slice of avocado. We got tostones here, which we did not mention in the podcast. But yes, of course, a staple as well, tostones. Down here, we've got el arroz pegao, or sometimes it'll just be called straight pegao. Pegao, what does that come from? It comes from the verb pegar, which means to stick. It can also mean to hit, but you hear it more in Puerto Rico as stick, to be really close to something. So arroz pegao is the part of the rice that got kind of burnt on the bottom of the pan, and it's crispy, and it has a lot of flavor. And this is used not only in Puerto Rico, and in La República Dominicana también, but they call it concón. It's a big beef between Puerto Ricans and Dominicans, what this should be called. To me, pegao makes more sense. It's stuck to the pan. Really, really tasty. El arroz pegao. Of course, there's another one where it would actually be pegado. The D would be in between there. Your typical adjective structure like cansado or emocionado, estresado, hervido, even. Pegao, we're dropping the D there. Pegao. Getting into some desserts, we have tembleque, which is kind of similar to flan, but made with coco, made with coconut. That's my personal favorite. Arroz con dulce, very popular around the Christmas season. Yeah, sweet rice, like a rice pudding type of deal. Some raisins, and then you've got different type of coconut treats, dulce de coco here. These I like, these are pretty tasty. Dulce de guayaba, have lots of different sweets that are made with the fruit guava paste. Right, very tasty. That flaky pastry that's stuffed with it inside. Que rico. Relleno de guayaba, right, stuffed. This is one of, oopsie. This did not get edited, sorry. This should be La Palmera. Palmera, I wanted to include this because it's one of Alfredo's favorite sweets. Oh my, how do we end up all the way back here? 1 second, friends. Okay, La Palmera, it's one of Alfredo's favorite. It looks very much like this typically in Puerto Rico. I think palmeras are made a number of different ways. Nice flaky, sugary pastry here, and it always usually has sprinkles on it. And then, of course, flan. We didn't mention it, but how could we forget flan? Very important. And I need another picture to fill in this slide. So there it is. I grew up being slightly a cookie monster. My thing is cookies. And so for that reason, cookies are not a central part of Puerto Rican sweets. And I've not found that same love for Puerto Rican desserts as I have for Puerto Rican food. I'm really much more of a cookie gal myself. Okay, friends, give me 1 second here. I want to let this come in little by little. Up here, stop by paragraph. So sorry. Okay. There we go. We are now moving into our grammar portion, and I want to start off by going over the verb llevar, which of course is kind of a vocab topic, but I want you to see how it's used reflexively versus not. Llevar is one of these verbs that has lots of meanings depending on the context it's used in. It's an incredibly important word for you to have, so I'd like you to know how to use it in different contexts and see how the grammar works, depending on the use you'd like to give to it. All right, you will have heard me said, siempre te llevas comida, which is that you always take food home with you. You always take food with you. Okay, well, we're going to get back to this example. I'm using this as the jumping off piece to talk about the verb llevar. All right, here you'll see that it's used reflexively. That's why the te is before it. But I'm going to break down the uses of llevar when it's not reflexive. Okay? Llevar, when you're in the context of items, will mean to carry. So I use this example of llevo mis platos al fregadero. That would be like I carry my plates to the sink, I take my plates to the sink, etc. We could use bring there, but bring is a little bit tricky in Spanish because it's very particular about when you use take or bring. So where we might say I bring my plates to this kitchen sink, or I carry them there, you would use llevo in that context. Llevo mis platos al fregadero. In the context of la ropa, in the context of clothes, llevar means to wear. Okay? Llevo ropa cómoda en casa. Llevo ropa cómoda en casa is I wear comfortable clothes at home. To wear, when you're talking about clothes or anything you can put on your body, right? I could use this for espejuelos as well. Espejuelos is the word in Puerto Rico for glasses. Let me write that down real quick so you can see that. Espejuelos are glasses. That's one that pretty particular to Puerto Rico. You'll hear lentes, gafas, other versions, but espejuelos, I could use that as well, right? Anything referring to if you can put it on yourself, on your body, llevar is a good verb to use in the context of to wear. Okay, llevar, when you're talking about people, would be like to take or to give someone a ride. People ask me all the time, how do I say I gave him a ride or he needs a ride to? Llevar is the verb that implies that. It's what you use for implying that you take someone somewhere. Okay, Alfredo me lleva al aeropuerto cuando me voy de viaje. Okay? Alfredo me lleva, now we're seeing the verb in he, right? He takes me to the airport when I have a trip to go on or I leave for a trip. So that's what this sounds like, okay? He takes me there. It's, if you can replace it with gives me a ride to, use the verb llevar, okay? I'm gonna give her a ride to this place. La voy a llevar. I'm going to take her. La voy a llevar. Okay, in the context of items to carry, in the context of ropa to wear, in the context of people, taking them somewhere to give them a ride. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing here. So sorry, I did not realize. I'm trying a new format for the slideshow. And with that comes some growing pains. I'm going to keep our original example up here. Siempre te llevas comida. And we're going to do one more example of llevar when it's not reflexive, okay? Llevar with time. This is a very important one to learn, especially if you're at this intermediate level, is a shortcut for saying have been, always in the context of time. Look at these examples. Llevo 2 años y medio en Puerto Rico. Llevo 2 años y medio en Puerto Rico means I've been. I'm taking the verb llevar, I'm saying it's a shortcut for have been. I'm conjugating it for yo, so it means I have been in Puerto Rico for 2.5 years. This will always be the structure, at least as far as I've seen, when using the verb llevar. Immediately following it is the time frame that you're talking about. So let's say instead of talking about being in a place for 2 years, that you've been learning Spanish for a year. That would sound like llevo, as I've been. Let's put it in yo. What's next? I need you to give me the time. Un año, muy bien. Good. Next, you'll put the verb in ing, learning. Let's hear that. Aprendiendo. Exacto, español. So that altogether sounds like llevo un año aprendiendo español. Yo llevo 10 días aprendiendo italiano. I've been learning Italian, what's in the middle? For 10 days, the amount of time. Notice that I'm not giving a por, I'm not needing a preposition there. Llevo 2 años. It goes right to the time. Okay, people ask me all the time, ¿cuánto llevas en Puerto Rico? or when I first got here, llevas poco. Have you been? Llevas, they're talking to me. Have you been? Poco, for a little bit of time. Llevas poco? Sometimes it'll just be that. If it's already understood, the context is talking about here on the island, then they don't need to clarify further. Also, the other example that I have here on the screen. Llevamos 2 años juntos. Llevamos 2 años juntos. We've been together for 2 years. Okay, llevamos, we've been. Juntos is the word for together. 2 years. 2 años. There it is. So I'm going to ask you a question. ¿Cuánto llevas en tu trabajo actual? How long have you been in your current job? ¿Cuánto llevas en tu trabajo actual? Are you answering? I hope so. Yo llevo 3 años como maestra de español. I've been a Spanish teacher for 3 years. Llevo 3 años como maestra de español. Or I could use a verb there. I've been teaching Spanish for 3 years. Llevo 3 años enseñando español. Okay, and finally, back to where we came from. Te llevas. Let's look at llevar now when it's reflexive. All of those examples that we looked at, to wear, to carry, to take someone somewhere, or llevar the time, are not reflexive. They should not have a me, te, se, nos, or se with them. Llevarse. Now we're seeing it reflexively. I've talked about reflexive verbs every single time I've done a class because they are so damn important. You underestimate how important reflexive verbs are in Spanish. And I've told you every single time that I have like 3 live classes explaining reflexive verbs. So take advantage of that. Llevarse is like to take away or to take with you. Okay, so you'll hear, or I hear that, llévate el arroz, llévate un poquito del bacalao, llévate el fricasé. Llévate means take it with you. Llévate. Take the rice home with you. Take it with you. I'm going to give you some other examples. And when I'm shopping, I've heard this before. I was looking at a shirt one time, and the woman was helping me, and I'm like, okay. Pues esta, this one. And she says, te la vas a llevar. You're going to take it with you, as in, are you going to purchase it? You're going to go with that one? Maybe we wouldn't really in English say, you're going to take it with you? Sounds like you're about to walk out the store without paying it. But are you going to go with that one? Might be in the context of having 2 options, and they're clarifying, te la vas a llevar. You're going to go with that one. Good. You're going to take that one. Okay. So it's the idea of taking an item from the place where you are out of the place there where you are, right? If you're in someone's home and they're telling you, llévate la comida, they want you to take that food with you. If you're in the context of shopping and you're maybe pointing to something, me voy a llevar esa. I'm going to take that one, and you're pointing to it, something. That's very common to use. That's how you'll communicate that you want that to be the one that goes home with you. Okay? Llevarse. Spend some time with llevar and be very observant every time you're hearing or seeing llevar used, because that will help create all of the synapses in your brain that need to be created in order for this to not be such a foreign and challenging concept of the many ways and the many uses of it. Every time you see it used in one of the contexts that reinforces these examples of its uses, you understand it a little bit more. Okay, so be observant as well. All right. That was our little bit of beginner intermediate type grammar, and I'm just going to switch over. I have one more topic that I'd like to go over, which is to continue to show you guys the subjunctive for those that are tackling that giant subject of the subjunctive. That says subjunctive up there. Let's fix that, shall we? Subjunctive. I would also like to say that your attitude towards these things will determine how well you learn them, how well your brain sort of takes them in. That is generally the truth for language learning. So something that even polyglots, people who have learned lots of languages, acknowledge is that with kids, if there is a adverse feeling towards the language, they won't learn it. If they're being kind of forced into learning the native language of their parents, At the same time, they get criticized a lot for the way they speak it, the fact that they speak with errors, the fact that they have a bit of an accent, then they will have a complete resistance, and rightfully so, to learning the language. And it just won't be something that they will produce. So you have to measure your feelings about different things that come up in the language process. If you say, this is so hard and I hate the subjunctive and blah, 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 then that's your reality. Or you can say, I'm still observing, I'm still learning. That's how I looked at a lot of things that didn't, once I got to a place where I felt like I was a little more wise in the language learning process, I would go, there's things that I'm still observing. I'm not sure. I've seen a couple contradicting examples of this, and I'm not exactly sure that I have it figured out. So I'm still observing. And I think that helps a lot with eventually being able to incorporate that thing into how I speak. If I have resistance against it, I'm never going to want it to be something that I use every time I come up to, this is the subjunctive, doesn't it? I hear so many students do that. You're really doing yourself a disservice. Change the way that you perceive it. Okay. Let's look at these couple examples. And remember also that the reality of learning the subjunctive is that you just need to learn the things that trigger it. Don't try to look at this from a philosophy of the subjunctive, because it won't do you any good. You'll try to use it in times where it's not used, and you'll be missing the times that you're supposed to be, because it's just doesn't follow clear logic. Saying that something is normal doesn't seem like it should be a subjunctive statement, but it is. It falls into the category of impersonal expressions. For those that are already into this and know the weirdo chart, the wishes, emotions, impersonal expressions, recommendations, doubt, and ojalá. Impersonal expressions, things like es importante que, es posible que, es común que, es normal que, things that say it's common and it's normal, which doesn't seem like a subjunctive, airy-fairy mood, trigger the subjunctive. So just learn the phrases, okay, and keep practicing your subjunctive conjugations so that you get quicker at producing it. Let's look at these examples that Alfredo used, where Alfredo uses subjunctive. He talked about eating mofongo. No porque no quiera. No porque no quiera. Not because I wouldn't like to, is the feel. So I asked him about this one too. And I said, what about if you say no porque no quiera? He said, in that situation, it's because it's right in front of you. So it's there and it's absolutely a truth, because the thing is happening in real time in front of you. No puedo comer, in my case, for that certain group of vegetables and fruits that I can't eat, I can't digest well, I would say, un bistec encebollado, steak with cebolla, with onions. If it was put in front of me, or if it was an option there to serve from, I could say, no puedo comer eso, no porque no quiero, because it's right there in front of me and it's a reality. But when in this particular structure, you're saying potentially, not because I wouldn't like to, is the feel, or the best thing that I can relate it to, but because cae pesado, because it's just a really heavy food. This part of the subjunctive here that we see in the next two lines, la clave es que tenga el plátano, que cualquier de los tres lleve plátano, are both fall into your sort of potential outcome, or something that you're looking for that you don't know exists. So when I did taught the subjunctive on the platform that I used for my community last summer, and then we did a subjunctive challenge, the two ways I had people sort of think about this was to describe your ideal home or your ideal partner, your ideal man, your ideal woman. Tenga mi hombre ideal, el amor de mi vida. Tenga una barba. Tenga un man bun, okay? Why? Because we don't know if he exists. So the whole idea is that it's a potential thing, or if you're looking for a house and you want it to have quiero una casa, also just the fact that quiero que triggers the sound. Quiero una casa que tenga 3 cuartos, quiero que haya mucho espacio, que no se escuche que no se escuchen los sonidos de los vecinos o de la ciudad, whatever. You know, all of these are potential things that I like to have in a thing that doesn't exist yet. So that's why it's subjunctive, okay? La clave es que tenga el plátano. The key is that it has, you know, that potential mojongo, that it has plátano. Que cualquier de los tres, when he's talking about the trifongo, right? You can have a mofongo made with one, bifongo with two viandas, or a trifongo with three. What's important is that one of the three has plátano. Is plátano as the base. Okay, so lleve, coming from llevar, that it carries. Llevar again. Okay, that's normal to use in food too. Que lleve plátano. Right here we're seeing the potential thing that we're describing that we don't know for sure exists, or it's not in front of us right now, so therefore triggers the subjunctive. All right, everybody. Gracias como siempre por escuchar. Thanks for listening, o gracias por ver el episodio. Thanks for watching. Como siempre, por favor, sígame en las redes sociales. You can follow me on social media, TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram, all at Carrie B, KERRYBE_, to stay up on the latest for learning Spanish. Muchas gracias y nos vemos en la próxima.